Station gang, and welcome back to Surrounded by Short Boxes with your boy Stu from Dr. Doom's fan club. This show is a spotlight on some of my favorite back issues from the personal collection and what I love so much about them. Today, we are stepping into the grit and grime of Hell's Kitchen as we tag along not with the man without fear, but instead Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich, who's about to have a movie theater experience that he's never going to forget and learn that cigarettes can kill you in more ways than one. So let's let fly the sigh and talk about Daredevil 179 from 1981, both written and drawn by the Godfather, the OG, Frank Miller, the man who turned comics from a medium for kids into a bona fide adult art form. How'd you put it again, Uncle Frank?
It was as if I brought, whiskey into a playground or something.
Eat your heart out, Shakespeare. Let's get into this issue and what I love about it so much. As always, first let's set our table. In 1979, at just 22 years of age, Frank Miller is given the reins to Daredevil, a title that up to that point had suffered from slumping sales, a lack of a consistent creative team, and overall poor characterization. Initially, Miller's intent was to make the book more lighthearted than his predecessor, Roger McKenzie. He takes over on issue 158, initially just on penciling duties only. It's 10 issues later, on Daredevil 168, when Miller gets full creative control and starts writing and drawing each issue, and in so doing really begins to lean into the noir elements and make this book his own. It's the genesis of his femme fatale Elektra in issue 168 that starts to change the tone drastically. Miller would later recount in a 1981 Amazing Heroes interview saying, quote, "Her presence led the whole series down a very dark path. Because I was a kid in my 20s and making up a sexy killer woman, it was bound to get pretty grim." Now, Miller was also living in New York City at the time, and the mean streets of the Big Apple are a pervasive presence throughout this run. Over the course of his time, both writing and drawing Daredevil, Miller was mugged twice. And all of these harrowing experiences in the city come to bear in a big way in this comic. And we will touch more on that specifically in a moment. This Daredevil run will also be a formative and career defining moment for Frank's inker and right hand man, Klaus Janson, who'd previously made a name for himself inking the work of Sal Buscema. With a constant rotating bullpen of artists on the title before Frank Miller's arrival, Janson had basically been tasked with keeping the art on Daredevil as consistent as possible as inker. Janson and Miller will establish a lifelong working relationship here, as both artists begin to pick up things from the other's style to the point where it's really hard to recognize where one artist's work ends and the other begins by the end of this run. Frank will go on to trust Klaus more and more with the artwork as the book goes on, eventually relinquishing artistic duties to him almost completely by issue 185. Janson spoke on the formation of their friendship and lifelong working partnership in an interview with Marvel back in 2020, saying, quote, "Before Frank came on, there were so many different pencilers assigned to the book because Daredevil was bi-monthly at that point and really on life support in a lot of ways. And when Frank came on, nobody really expected him to stay on for as long as he did because the pencilers usually would do 2 or 3 issues and then hop off. But when Frank came on, there was definitely a shift in terms of level of commitment. I think people really started to care about the book. I know certainly Frank and I did, and then it really ramped up when Frank started to write the series. There were no creative differences. We really thought in very identical and similar approaches to storytelling. It was a lot of fun. It was really a terrific working relationship. Issue 179 finds its 21 issues into Miller's time on The Man Without Fear, and though this run on Daredevil will last just over 30 some issues in total, it will nonetheless introduce virtually every single thing we have come to know and love about the character and the world of Matt Murdock and Daredevil today. Whether it's the importance of Matt's dad to his story and his identity, or the way in which his powers work, or it's the creation of characters like Elektra, Stick, and the Hand, as well as giving others like Kingpin and Bullseye their modern day gravitas in both Hell's Kitchen and the Marvel Universe at large. A lot of these moments are happening right here all around us in this portion of the run. Elektra debuts in 168, The Hand shows up in Daredevil 174, and Stick's first appearance is in Daredevil 176. So many of the beloved elements and characters of the Man Without Fear's canon first find life within these pages. So, back in Daredevil 177, while Daredevil worked with Stick to regain his radar sense and really reassert his power set, we learned through a meeting with J. Jonah Jameson that reporter Ben Urich has drafted an article for the Daily Bugle that will draw the connection between mob and organized crime and every major decision that New York City Councilman Randolph Cherry has made during his time in office. Jonah cautiously reminds Ben that Cherry, who is indeed one of Kingpin's puppets of power, still has immense popularity and money behind him, and that a piece like this could either sink Cherry's career as councilman or the Bugle as a newspaper. When Ben asks and when kind of wonders if Jonah wants to kill the article altogether, Jameson replies that no, he just wants him to double check all his facts and make sure that they publish an airtight piece of journalism. Later in the issue, Ben's piece does run, and Cherry responds with $1 million defamation lawsuit against the Bugle. Naturally, Jameson turns to the law offices of Nelson and Murdoch for the Bugle's representation. At those offices, we meet Sheldon, who's a young kid who has in his possession evidence that can bring down the crime lord of NYC. He's got checks that Kingpin wrote to Cherry, and he's going to use them, or he's using them as blackmail to expose, their relationship and, Cherry's obvious corruption here. Kingpin first sends a group of thugs to the law offices of Nelson and Murdoch to collect Sheldon while he's there, but with the help of Daredevil, he is able to escape. Later that night, these thugs return and threaten Matt to, give him Sheldon's location and where the checks are at. But these goons run into bad luck yet again when Luke Cage and Iron Fist show up and lend a helping hand. Daredevil spies on Cherry as he has a phone call with Sheldon where he agrees to a handoff for cash for the checks with the kid during the parade the next day. But that all goes bust when another young punk steals the payoff money during the handoff, and Sheldon ends up losing the checks during this dramatic fall from the building during the parade. They disappear into the ticker tape. So this is important to our spotlighted issue today because it means Ben Urich is in, constant need of concrete evidence in this Cherry investigation, at least for the time being. So in the meantime, Kingpin decides to stop playing games and pursue a much more lethal means of dealing with Urich and any other threat to Randolph Cherry and his rise to puppeted power. Kingpin will exert his dominance and tighten his grip on the city behind the blood-soaked sigh of Elektra, who is now about to be at his employ after what we'll call a recruitment drive, right? And in issue 178, Elektra and the big man ominously meet at the end of the issue. And as we'll soon find out, that does not spell anything good for Daredevil or Ben Urich. All right, issue 179, today's feature, Spiked, the story is called. We'll learn why soon enough. Skewered also would have worked as an issue title here. Again, you'll get it in a minute. We open up with Ben Urich in the phone booth. He's holding everybody up as he apologizes to his wife, Doris, for chasing down yet another lead for this Cherry story, as we just talked about, now that our boy Sheldon's evidence has disappeared into the ticker tape of the parade during the excitement of last issue. Doris insists that, of course, she's heard all this before with the last few stories that Ben was writing. The next story is always the most important. And this little bit we get with Ben's wife in this issue really helps to ground our character, make him very relatable and that much more human, and in turn make me that much more emotionally invested in him. Ben, much like Matt Murdock, as a man possessed by his mission, right? And unfortunately, Doris, as his wife, is stuck dealing with the fallout from his incessant pursuit of the truth. Ben meets his informant at a seedy movie theater. He's still not allowed to smoke there. They're trying to help you out, Ben. You and those damn cigarettes. This exchange is supposed to provide him with information on Kingpin's connection with Cherry. And knowing the threat, Kingpin obviously presents, he's been sending his goons out to, tighten up these loose ends. They're in a crowded movie theater so as to blend in better. Ben knows not yet who's really on his case. Ben sits down to hand his source $200, but first he wants to hear what he's got. He wants to hear the evidence. and just before his source can really get a few words out, he feels the pain. So this issue has several moments of unbelievably paced action, horror, and thrills, and this is the first such example of many, and really a standout for me. I barely took a breath the first time I read this page. It's done so naturally, and it's so incredibly terrifying and harrowing for us to experience as a reader through the eyes of Ben Urich. I absolutely adore it. As Ben's source begins to reveal his information about Cherry, he just stops with a simple ow. It's not some overstated, attention grabbing, wailing and flailing, but instead just a simple little like poke. It feels like simple little declaration of pain. We find out that Elektra is seated behind these two, and she is slowly thrusting her sigh through this man's spine, and we watch Ben's face in horror as he sees his source sort of like lurch forward. And I love how you know Miller portrays this sign here just poking out from beneath his shirt. Um, this moment also served as one of anchor Klaus Janson's favorite moments. He had this to say about it on a recent interview with the great podcast Off Panel.
Boy, I never thought that the Comics Code Authority was a hindrance or held us back, and that in a lot of ways, structure and boundaries usually motivates creative people to come up with very interesting and creative ways to tell the same story, but get around the censorship. There was a scene in Daredevil when Elektra is sitting in a movie theater behind Ben Urich and I think it was Ben Urich and another guy, and she sticks her sigh, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, through the back of the seat. And the guy sitting in the seat, of course, becomes impaled. You can't show that. But the way Frank did it was he showed the sigh pushing the shirt. So we didn't actually see blood, or we didn't actually see penetration of the body. We just saw the sigh push the shirt, the front of his shirt forward. And we were able to get away with that. There's always ways of being creative and interesting and not allowing boundaries or restrictions or censorship to get in the way of, what you want to say.
Yeah, and I just also just love this shot of Ben looking back behind the seat to see Elektra's sigh with these spider webbed cracks and blood coming from the holes it made in the movie theater seat. It all feels so real and authentic. And as Ben looks on in horror, man, she whispers to him, "Your friend is dead, Mr. Urich. Move or speak, and you will join him." And Ben, man, just the look on his face is just so dead on. And the fact that all this is going down in a movie theater unnoticed serves to heighten our anxiety and terror, obviously. I'm looking at you, Scream 2. Elektra then tells Urich what's going to happen. In several weeks, Cherry will be elected mayor, and as mayor, he will serve the interests of Kingpin, and Ben will do nothing to stop this. She also advises him to cease his investigation into organized crime, and Cherry, or he's going to be murdered too. As she's relaying these words, she is slowly removing her bloody slide from the back of the theater seat of Ben's dead source. And I love the bit of movement Miller gave us in this panel where his dead source just kind of flops and keels over onto his shoulder. Not only that, but Elektra holding the bloody side to his neck and telling him, "You will sit now and watch the movie, and you will think about how very vulnerable you are." It's such a cold ass line, right? And as she walks out of the theater, our final panel rests on Ben's terrified eyes as his source lays on his shoulder, staring lifelessly off into space. I love how in the background we see like another couple romantically doing the same thing, kind of a woman laying on her date's shoulder. It's a terrific little bit of terrifying contrast, man. And it's here that our narration from Ben that takes us through this whole issue begins. My name is Ben Urich. This is my story, right? Absolutely stellar, incredible open. This scene is also directly inspired by both Fear and New York City itself. Miller stated in an interview with he and Janson, this came out in 1982, the Daredevil Chronicles, These were printed by Fantico. They had one for X-Men, Fantastic Four, and a few others, featured interviews with creators and all sorts of good stuff. But Miller had this to say, saying, quote, "That scene comes from a private fear of mine. About a year or two back, a woman started going into movie theaters and shoving an ice pick into the back of people's necks. It's very frightening. And there I was sitting in a big room that anybody could get into with my back exposed. I like to play into very daily fears. Why else do a story on a subway?" So yeah, as far as these opening 3 pages go, I'd put this chilling sequence up against anything. Anything when it comes to making a last impression out of the gate and giving you some thrilling moments that you're never going to forget. And I think it's no coincidence that Janson still remembers this scene all these years later. All right, so moving on, the noir stays on full tilt. Look at this killer shot of the Daily Bugle bullpen, right? The smoke and shadows of the offices of the paper. It's a glorious setting here as Ben tries to work through the trauma, right, of what he's just experienced. And I love his narration. Quote, "I'm still shaken 3 hours later, and the shadows no longer seem empty in my office." Just fantastic writing. Miller is able to fit in the obligatory Jim Shooter required character origin bio in this sequence, as Ben reflects on the fact that he knows Daredevil's true identity is Matt Murdock, and the possible, bombastic Pulitzer Prize winning piece of journalism that would make for if he wrote that article. But in the end, he cannot bring himself to do it, as he admits, quote, "It's worth too much to me to know that in this city where crime and corruption are thick as roaches in yesterday's garbage, there's one man like Daredevil," end quote. So yeah, besides just giving us a fascinating and empathetic look into the life of Ben Urich, I really appreciate the parallels Miller draws here between, him and Daredevil, both restless soldiers for justice and truth, no matter the personal hazard or cost to those around them. Of course, Daredevil arrives with a warning to Ben about how those cigarettes are going to kill him. Oh, foreshadowing, you fickle beast, you. Ben relays his account of events to Daredevil, and Matt realizes that Elektra's in town, right? And he tells Ben about, a little bit about the past, that they once meant a great deal to each other, but if she's out getting stabby in New York City, she's got to be stopped. So next we get Cherry himself calling up Urich and getting him to come down to the gym where he's working out with a posse of meatheads. There he offers up some veiled threats to Ben to drop his reporting. As Ben kind of calls out Cherry's threat to him, his entourage of goons push him down on the bench press, and they drop 450 pounds on his neck. It's about to be lights out for our boy, and thankfully Daredevil is there to back up his friend. Picks up the weights off his neck like it's nothing. He knocks two of the goons out before throwing the bench press into the arms of Cherry, who gets all ticked off, and his goon is glad to help him out so long as he doesn't have to deal with Daredevil, who just put on that impressive display. On their way out, Daredevil, of course, overhears Cherry's frantic phone call to the Kingpin, in which they set up a meeting at a cafe in Little Italy the next day. Unfortunately, Daredevil realizes that Matt Murdock is due in court tomorrow at that time, and he tells Ben to forget about it, lie low, that there'll be other opportunities to nail these guys. But on the next day and on the next page, we see Ben can't help himself. He stakes out the cafe, taking pictures from a dark alleyway, and he spots the Kingpin arrive and enter the restaurant. When Cherry arrives a few minutes later, he sees this beggar lady, kind of giving the Kingpin's agents a hard time. It's as if she's trying to contact Kingpin, but when she's rebuffed, she wanders down into the subway. Urich kind of senses there might be something here. This might be something to this. He doesn't know what it is yet, but he feels like he's onto something. And we get his, a couple of his rules of journalism. Number one, if it's not supposed to be there, it's a lead. So he follows this woman down into the decrepit subway area and is snapping pictures of her. We as the reader know it's Vanessa Fisk, who was presumed dead after a building collapsed all around her back in issue 170. And Ben will come to discover this later on when he develops the photos. Anyway, he's kind of creeped out by his surroundings, and he heads back up to the cafe. The story's kind of seemingly at a dead end, at least for now. He heads home. Back at home, we get another one of these expressive, superhuman pages. not superhuman in that way, but superhuman in the bland regular way, right? Remarkably relatable, as I said before. Ben's at home with his wife Doris, who wants only one thing: to spend more time with her always absent husband. And I love, again, I love this little back and forth between them as he comes out of the shower and tickling her, trying to get her in the mood. He's going to stay tonight, right? Wild horses couldn't pull him away, or the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. But then the phone rings. And one of my favorite moments in this comic is not the cold-blooded, well, it is the cold-blooded movie theater scene and some of the action we're going to get in a bit, but it's also this small moment here in the bottom right of the page on this panel of a dejected Doris, knowing she's losing out tonight to yet another lead, her reporter husband can't ignore. I think it's genius how Miller kind of frames the bars on the bedpost to look like incarceration, and make this, this prison of a marriage to Ben. It's just a brilliant way to convey that. I love that scene. Ben, in the meantime, is off to the races following this other hot lead. He meets a stoolie at the diner who's charging $300 for juicy deets. He's got info that Cherry has a mistress. She's willing to talk about all she knows, and she's staying at a hotel right across the street. But Daredevil shows up and tells his friend that every thug in town all of a sudden has this information. And he says it all sounds really sloppy for Kingpin, and Kingpin's not sloppy, which means it's probably a trap, right? So Daredevil takes it upon himself to enter the hotel room and, bursts into the building across the street. As Urich watches from across the street, he starts to hear all kinds of commotion coming from inside, right? Saying, quote, "Subtle he's not, more like a one-man SWAT team." We're getting this cacophony of noises ringing out from inside the building until this hushed silence falls over everything. And I love the transition here as a worried Ben kind of looks on, and through his narration begs Matt to come to the window, let him know everything is okay, come to the window, Matt. And then Daredevil promptly comes crashing through said window, thrown out of there by Elektra. It's fantastic. Ben doesn't recognize her face, but definitely IDs that weapon from the movie theater early, right? Great artwork from Miller here and Janson, with Matt bouncing off the street lamp, and Ben's narration is pitch perfect as these two go at it. Lovers turned enemies battling for the fate of the entire city. Talk about your great copy. Just, again, such excellent writing from Miller. Action as well is so well scripted and sequenced here. And that's one thing I've always appreciated about Miller's storytelling, and something I really feel he has a particular knack for. Daredevil getting kicked out of the window again by Elektra, as Ben, we see Ben on the rooftop. He catches himself on the street wires, and we get this great panel of Elektra flying out after him and hooking her size onto those same wires and flipping through the air. It's acrobatic and kinetic. I love the energy here. It's fantastic. We never get the slightest feeling, though, that Matt has the upper hand in this fight, as he's chasing Elektra through a construction site. Whether he's getting thrown out of a window, kicked out of one, or catching a three-piece with onion rings and a large sweet tea here on the construction site. In his reckless pursuit of his former lover, she promptly turns around, kicks him in the stomach, hits him twice, uppercuts him twice with a blunt handle end of her sai, and he then barely ducks out of the way as she tries to kick him through a brick wall. Matt's able to, counter, roll over quickly, and kick her in the back before, striking her with a backhand, regretfully informing Elektra that she's forced his hand. She's forced this from him. But little does Matt know, this is all part of the plan. Elektra tells him not only she's tricked him, she has trapped him. And in that instant, he steps on a bear trap, bruh, which slams shut on his right leg. She tells him she didn't want to sever his foot, merely just leave him immobile. And I absolutely love Miller's choice to go in close here as Elektra delivers these lines. Saying, kind of like, look at you. What did she say? Quote, "So utterly hopeless." As she looks down on Matt with this mix of pity and affection. Matt, meanwhile, there with gritted teeth and pain, just looking bitter as hell. And I love Elektra's oh so brief moment of pause before she's again overtaken by her badass stoicism as she looks down indifferently upon him. Kicks down the brick wall behind him, sends a ton of bricks and debris crashing down on top of Matt with his hand out as he cries out, Elektra. You know, there's walls of brick crashing down to the floor. You know, it makes the floor underneath him give way beneath him, and he plunges down to the dark depths below as we see, Elektra watching on through the hole. It was just a fantastic shot. And now, guys, for our glorious conclusion, right? Another couple pages where you're not gonna breathe. You're bending these damn cigarettes, guys. He's on a nearby rooftop. As we saw before, he came out when Elektra was kicking Matt out of the window. On the nearby rooftop, snapping pictures of this heated lovers quarrel. But as Matt falls through the floor, he coughs twice, as he's done countless times throughout this issue. And this cough alerts Elektra, makes her snap her head up, and she spots him across the way. Again, guys, perfect sequencing here with the art. You hold your breath. You're feeling every second of this moment. After spotting Ben, I love Miller's choice here. He just shows us Elektra's sigh as she rotates it in her hand, sizing up the distance between her and Urich. It's a small, subtle little panel, but we never see Elektra actually throw her weapon. But this motion right here, the sigh moving in her hand, does so much heavy lifting. I love it. The last page is all terror and panic and horror and awfulness. Incredible work by Miller and Janson. As we just get freeze frames of Ben realizing what's about to happen and trying his best to turn and run, and still maintaining that cynical sense of humor to the end. His only bit of narration on this page was lousy cigarettes, as we see the sigh strike him from behind, sink into his spine. Wow. Holy hell. What a comic book, and what an ending. Daredevil 179 will always be one of my favorite chapters when it comes to the man without fear for so many reasons. It's a fascinating portrait into the past for one of my all-time favorite comic book writers and artists, Frank Miller, who at this point was just learning to trust himself and his artistic instincts, and in so doing was creating timeless canon for the character of Matt Murdock and the world of Daredevil. Whether it's a shocking murder inside a seedy Times Square movie theater, whether it's a close-up of terrified emotion, or it's the smoky shadows of the offices at the Daily Bugle, or it's a enthralling action of Elektra versus Daredevil, or it's Ben Urich running for his freaking life. Uncle Frank is operating at some of the highest levels of storytelling through a visual medium for me here. This issue is lean and mean. The pacing is super tight. There's nothing unnecessary, and you're reading with bated breath every page turn, as death and danger seem like they're lurking around every corner. And I really love and respect the way that these, Daredevil and Ben know this, but still soldier on. It's a shocked gasp of a book in the best and the worst way possible. Not only that, but it's again another instance with the creative team of Miller and Janson here really finding common ground and achieving artistic synchronicity, and with that shared vision, making some truly timeless art inside the pages of this run. This pair will soon make an even bigger splash in the books of history with The Dark Knight Returns a little later on in the decade. But, the gritty, noirish, real life New York City that they deliver here in Daredevil will serve as a template of sorts that anytime these two team up in the future. So that's it for me this time, gang. I hope you enjoyed. As always, you can find this episode and so much more over on my YouTube channel, Dr. Doom's Fan Club. Make sure you're subscribed with those notifications on so you don't miss anything new. And I'm also on Dr. Doom's Fan Club on IG, posting comics from my personal collection there. Until next time, station and bring back Colin Farrell.
Bullseye. Huh?